In the early spring of 1903, the dense forests surrounding Crater Lake, Oregon were alive with the usual symphony of wildlife, birds calling to one another, the distant splash of water from mountain streams, and the rustle of deer moving through underbrush. Yet amid this pastoral serenity, a shadow quietly settled upon the remote community, carried not by any storm or natural phenomenon, but by two young figures whose arrival would forever mark the region's history. Phoebe and Wilbert Marlowe were identical twins, though their perfection in appearance masked a shared intensity that unsettled even those accustomed to the eccentricities of mountain life. They were in their early 20s, yet there was a precision in their movements, a synchronous alignment in their speech and gestures, that made anyone observing them instinctively step back. Their eyes, sharp and calculating, seemed to assess everyone and everything with the detached scrutiny of scholars. When they first appeared in town, walking side by side along the muddy streets, villagers whispered among themselves, "Something isn't right with those two," an old shopkeeper muttered. "They move like they share a single mind." The twins purchased a small, isolated property on the outskirts of Crater Lake, a dilapidated farmhouse surrounded by thick, untamed forest. They paid in cash, moving quickly to secure the land, and made no effort to introduce themselves beyond a curt nod to neighbors. Local children, daring to peer through the gaps in the fence, claimed they saw the twins talking to each other in low, urgent whispers, gesturing as though coordinating some secret activity. Villagers initially assumed that the Marlowes were simple recluses, perhaps eccentric scholars seeking solitude, but those who passed the property during their first weeks began to notice oddities. Windows were shuttered at strange angles, faint murmurs and occasional inexplicable cries seemed to emanate from the house at irregular hours, and no smoke ever rose from the chimney despite the chill of early spring. The twins wasted no time establishing their routine. Phoebe, delicate and sharp-eyed, oversaw the interior of the farmhouse, while Wilbert, tall and gaunt, supervised modifications to the property's perimeter. Neighbors occasionally caught glimpses of them walking through the forest together, always in perfect synchronization, carrying odd implements, shovels, heavy tops, bundles of rope. When asked about their purchases at the town store, they offered vague explanations: repairs, gardening, the occasional academic project. Yet something about their demeanor, so calm, so controlled, made even the most rational townsfolk uneasy. Among the first visitors to the Marlowe property was Homer Mixon, an experienced hunter and outdoorsman familiar with the woods surrounding Crater Lake. A friend of several local families, Homer had a reputation for observing the subtleties of human behavior as keenly as he did wildlife. In late March 1903, curious about the newcomers, he ventured to the property under the pretense of delivering supplies. Homer recalled in later accounts how immediately upon entering the house, a shiver ran down his spine. The twins greeted him in unison, their identical smiles precise and unnerving. "We've been expecting you," Wilbert said, and Homer noted the strange cadence of the words, measured, rehearsed, deliberate. During that visit, Homer casually mentioned that he had heard what sounded like a baby crying from the house. The twins' reaction was immediate and chilling. Their smiles disappeared simultaneously, and for a fleeting moment, Homer saw a cold, calculating glint in their eye. "That was likely the wind," Phoebe said, her voice smooth and unwavering. "Old houses make strange noises," but the twins' quick, almost rehearsed dismissal did not match the tension in the room. Homer, despite his years in the wilderness and countless encounters with danger, felt an instinctive need to step back. The twins, he realized, were something entirely beyond normal human eccentricity. Homer left the property that day with a gnawing sense that he had glimpsed something far darker than mere isolation or peculiar behavior. Over the following weeks, he could not shake the feeling that the Marlowes were hiding a secret that went beyond ordinary human comprehension. He began discreetly asking townsfolk about the twins, carefully probing for information without revealing the depth of his concern. What he learned only deepened his unease. Locals who had interacted with the Marlowes spoke with a strange, nervous hesitation. Clarence Benson, the town physician, became visibly uncomfortable when asked about the twins' household and quickly changed the subject. Several townspeople revealed that no one had ever seen the twins' children, though Phoebe was already pregnant. Homer also discovered that the twins had made unusual purchases in recent months: lime, heavy rope, excavation tools, and large quantities of food and supplies, always paying in cash. The local merchant noted that the Marlowes seemed anxious to complete transactions quickly, as if wary of being observed. Compelled by growing suspicion, Homer began observing the property from a distance. He moved silently through the forests during his hunts, noting the twins' strange patterns of activity. Lights flickered through windows at unusual hours, smoke occasionally rose from the chimney even on hot days, and he sometimes glimpsed shadowy figures moving in the yard before dawn. Homer's curiosity became suspicion, and suspicion grew into a determination to uncover the truth about the Marlowes. He relied on his decades of experience as a hunter to remain unseen, to track without detection. By early 1905, Phoebe had become pregnant for a third time, and the twins' secrecy intensified. They began spending more time in the basement, and Homer noted increasingly disturbing sounds emanating from the lower levels of the house. Cries that seemed almost inhuman, mixed with low moans and scratching noises. When Homer finally caught a glimpse of the third child, a girl, he was shocked to see that her deformities were more severe than those of her older siblings. Her breathing was labored, and her physical development had been twisted by months, if not years of unnatural confinement. What disturbed Homer most, however, was the methodical way the twins documented every aspect of their children's development. They measured limbs, recorded behaviors, and discussed physical characteristics in cold, clinical language, as though observing specimens in a laboratory rather than their own offspring. During this period, the twins stopped referring to the children by name, instead assigning them numbers or characteristics: the special one, the failure, and the improved one. This inhuman terminology terrified Homer, yet he realized he could not confront the twins openly. The house, he understood, was a fortress of secrets and control. By the end of February 1905, he decided to investigate further, moving under cover of dawn to observe the property through partially open basement windows. What he saw confirmed his worst fear. The basement had been divided into sections, each designed to confine someone or something. The twins moved between these sections, carrying food and water as though caring for animals, but the sounds were unmistakably human. Children's voices, sometimes crying, sometimes incoherent babbling, echoed from the darkened rooms. Homer understood, with a horror that chilled him to the bone, that the Marlowes were keeping their own children as experimental subjects, locked in conditions that no human being should endure. Homer Mixon vanished from the region shortly afterward. He failed to appear for a planned hunt 3 days later, and a search party found only his rifle abandoned in the forest about a mile from the Marlowe property. The twins expressed concern when questioned, offering help to locate him, but those who knew them sensed a chilling new confidence in their demeanor. Following Homer's disappearance, the legend of the twins began to grow, whispered among townsfolk who avoided not only the property but the surrounding forest. Experienced hunters altered their routes to avoid the Marlowe land entirely, convinced that something unnatural and dangerous resided there. In early 1905, as Phoebe gave birth to her fourth child, the twins' obsession with secrecy intensified. Homer's friend, Waldo Oates, noted that Phoebe's children were hidden from sight immediately after birth. The fourth child, a boy, seemed physically normal, but his behavior was unnerving. He rarely cried, rarely moved, and exhibited an empty, unresponsive stare. The twins' obsession with documentation continued, and their plans for ongoing observation of their children's development became increasingly elaborate. By the end of 1906, with Phoebe's fifth and sixth pregnancies, the twins' activities became almost impossible to track. Waldo noted that their secrecy extended beyond their own property. Even trips into town were carefully coordinated to avoid notice. The basement, in particular, seemed to undergo constant modification, as if anticipating additional confinement. The soundscape of the house grew ever more disturbing. Cries, moans, and sounds that defied explanation echoed from below, haunting Waldo's nights and affecting his own mental and physical health. He lost weight, developed tremors, and became increasingly paranoid, sensing danger even when none seemed present. By 1908, the Marlowes' obsession had become fully pathological. Their children were now numbered and classified. The house a maze of reinforced doors, locked rooms, and small ventilation openings. Waldo attempted to intervene on multiple occasions, but each time he was threatened, watched, and ultimately forced to retreat. Even the local doctor, Clarence Benson, who had once been hesitant to involve himself, began to gather evidence, observing the property from a distance, and noting the systematic and calculated routines of the twins. But like Homer, Benson would disappear before he could report his findings, leaving only his abandoned carriage as evidence of his ill-fated curiosity. By this time, the legend of the Marlowe twins had begun to take hold among the residents of Crater Lake. They were no longer seen merely as isolated eccentrics, but as figures to be feared, a family whose private domain masked horrors that outsiders were too terrified to confront. The story of their arrival, Their methodical control over their children, and the disappearance of those who dared approach them, would become the foundation for a chilling narrative that endured for decades in whispered warnings and uneasy glances toward the Marlowe property. By 1908, the remote forests surrounding the Oats property had acquired a reputation for unease. Hunters and travelers, who ventured too close, reported strange sensations, a sudden chill, an oppressive silence, and the sense that unseen eyes were watching. The legend of the twins, Phoebe and Wilbert Oats, grew steadily as reports of disappearances began to surface. Homer Mixon was the first known outsider to vanish, followed by Dr. Clarence Benson, the town physician, who had dared to investigate. Their fates remained shrouded in mystery, and the twins' chillingly calm demeanor during inquiries only fueled local speculation. Sheriff Schuyler Tucker, a man seasoned in the law but unaccustomed to the kind of darkness surrounding the Oats property, became increasingly concerned. Letters from the governor and complaints from families across neighboring towns pressed him into action. Disappearances were no longer limited to intruders. Travelers passing near the property reported being followed, hearing unexplainable noises, and seeing figures moving in the windows. A traveling merchant who sought shelter during a storm described seeing Wilbert carrying a bundle that moved and made muffled noises, heading straight for the basement. A group of lumberjacks reported hearing multiple children's voices, crying or making sounds that seemed not entirely human, in the early hours of the morning. Despite the warnings and rumors, Tucker knew he needed evidence to take legal action. In March 1913, he obtained a search warrant, alleging criminal activity, and organized a small but prepared team to investigate the property. It was a cold, foggy morning when Tucker, 2 deputies, and a county representative approached the house. The air seemed unnaturally still, and the silence surrounding the property was suffocating. The house itself, which had once been a modest farmhouse, now appeared fortress-like. Windows were reinforced, doors were locked with heavy iron, and the overall structure exuded a sense of deliberate secrecy. Phoebe and Wilbert greeted the sheriff and his team with an unsettling calm. Their smiles were perfectly synchronized, their eyes glazed but intense, as if expecting this moment. Wilbert calmly admitted that they had been waiting for this visit, a statement that sent a shiver down Tucker's spine. The team began the search on the main floor, where evidence of the twins' obsession with heredity and human observation became immediately apparent. Rooms were lined with meticulously organized notes, anatomical sketches, family trees, and complex diagrams illustrating hereditary traits across generations. Children were referred to not by names but by numbers and characteristics, a clinical, almost inhuman method of classification. The first truly disturbing discovery came in an upstairs room. A young girl, approximately 9 years old, confined in a small, poorly ventilated space. Her deformities were severe, limbs atrophied, facial features twisted, and malnutrition evident in every movement. She reacted to the team with fear, making inarticulate, animalistic sounds. The door had been reinforced from the outside, and evidence indicated that she had been confined for years. When confronted, Phoebe explained that the child was dangerous to herself, and that confinement was for her protection. Wilbert described the children as special subjects for observation. Neither showed remorse. The team descended to the basement, where the full extent of the horror was revealed. The lower level had been converted into a series of confined rooms, each reinforced and equipped with small ventilation openings. The first room contained a boy of 8, who appeared physically normal but displayed severe cognitive impairment. He exhibited repetitive behaviors, rocking, banging his head, and producing rhythmic sounds that were his only form of self-soothe. The second room held a 7-year-old girl, emaciated and covered in infected wounds. Ropes had cut deep grooves into her wrists, indicating long-term restraint. She cowered in the darkest corner, her eyes wide with terror. The third room was empty, but showed signs of recent occupation. Dirty straw on the floor, ropes attached to the walls, and the unmistakable stench of decomposition. Marks scratched into the walls suggested someone had counted days, struggling to maintain a sense of time and sanity. The fourth room contained a shocking revelation: the decomposed remains of a small child, partially hidden under a pile of rags. The body had been confined under horrific conditions, with broken nails and scratches, indicating a desperate attempt to escape. When Tucker confronted the twins, they calmly rationalized the death as part of their observational process, describing life and death as necessary components of their study. The twins had documented every aspect of the children's development, noting responses to deprivation, confinement, and other stresses, in clinical, unemotional detail. Even more alarming
were the indications of the twins' involvement in the disappearances of outsiders. Personal belongings of Homer Mixon and Dr. Benson were discovered, along with detailed notes outlining how each man had interfered with the twins' research and needed to be removed. The methods to lure and eliminate these threats were described with the same precision used to document their children, revealing a calculated, methodical approach to silencing anyone who came too close. Waldo Oates, the family patriarch, was discovered in the attic in a state of near-total mental collapse, malnourished, filthy, and constantly muttering about sounds from the basement. He had attempted to intervene, but was ultimately confined and silenced by the twin. His makeshift record of the horrors, scratched into a wooden beam to count days, illustrated the years of control and intimidation imposed by Phoebe and Wilbert. The arrest of the twins sent shockwaves through the Crater Lake community. When news spread of the surviving children and the conditions they had endured, disbelief gave way to horror. The 4 remaining children were removed from the property in critical condition. The 9-year-old girl, confined for most of her life, had difficulty walking and exhibited severe developmental delays. The 8-year-old boy, though physically intact, had the cognitive function of a much younger child. The younger girl weighed less than 40 pounds, had a pathological fear of sunlight, and bore deep scars from long-term restraint. The youngest boy had lost vision in one eye due to infection, showed signs of severe trauma, and exhibited animalistic eating behavior. Even the most seasoned authorities were unprepared for the clinical, methodical cruelty of the Oates twins. The children's behaviors demonstrated extensive conditioning. When clapped for twice, they curled into fetal positions. When hearing heavy footsteps, they retreated to corners. Attempts to elicit normal responses were met with fear, aggression, or dissociation. The surviving children had been transformed into human specimens, robbed of basic childhood experiences, and forced into a twisted form of obedience for the sake of their parents' obsession.
During interrogation, the twins maintained their unnerving calm. Wilbert described the children as unique study subjects, products of consanguinity whose deformities and mental limitations offered valuable insight into heredity. Phoebe explained that isolation and confinement were controlled conditions necessary for precise observation, not cruelty. Both asserted that their actions had been planned years in advance, based on careful research of hereditary abnormalities and previous studies conducted in distant institutions. They had intentionally sought isolation in Crater Lake to ensure uninterrupted execution of their observations. The Oates twins' trial became a sensational event in Oregon, drawing crowds from neighboring towns. Prosecutors presented evidence of long-term planning, calculated manipulation, and deliberate neglect. Defense experts argued for the influence of isolation, arguing that the twins themselves were victims of distorted thinking and the consequences of consanguinity, yet the jury was convinced that Phoebe and Wilbert's actions had been deliberate and executed with precision over nearly a decade. The verdict was unanimous: guilty of multiple counts of murder, aggravated child abuse, and criminal negligence. Both were sentenced to life imprisonment. Even in prison, the twins maintained that their actions had been justified, claiming that science would one day validate their method. Phoebe died in 1934 at 50 years old, steadfast in her convictions. Wilbert survived until 1951, continuing to assert the value of their work and never expressing remorse. Waldo Oates, irreparably traumatized, spent his remaining years in a state asylum, haunted by the sounds he had heard and the children he could not save. The surviving children, despite removal from the Oates property, never fully recovered. Years of neglect, abuse, and enforced isolation left physical and psychological scars that could not be erased. The 9-year-old girl never learned to walk properly, remaining in institutional care. The 8-year-old boy achieved limited communication, but was never independent. The younger girl died 2 years after her rescue, her body unable to recover from prolonged abuse. The youngest boy lived until 15, but remained incapable of normal adaptation, succumbing to a panic-induced death. The Oates property was abandoned, and eventually destroyed by fire. Some suspected arson, others lightning. Yet the community preferred to believe the house itself had rejected the horrors within. The roadies of Homer Mixon and Dr. Benson were never recovered. The twins took the secret of their fates to their grave. In Crater Lake, whispers of the Oates twins' deeds became a cautionary legend, a reminder of how isolation, obsession, and cold rationality can transform humanity's darkest impulses into lived reality. The mountains surrounding Crater Lake became a haunted landscape, the site of lingering unease. Hunters and travelers reported strange sounds, twisted vegetation, and an instinctive sense of danger near the former property. In this wilderness, The story of Phoebe and Wilbert Oats endures, a grim testament to the human capacity for calculated cruelty and the consequences of unbridled obsession. The echoes of their actions carried on the wind through the silent trees serve as a perpetual warning that sometimes the most monstrous horrors are born not of imagination, but of deliberate rationalized human intent. Even after Phoebe and Wilbert Oats were imprisoned and the Oats property was destroyed by fire in 1920, the shadow of their deeds lingered across Crater Lake and the surrounding Oregon mountains. Locals reported a persistent feeling of unease when approaching the site, even decades later. Hunters claimed that the forest seemed alive in a sinister way, the wind carrying muffled moans and cries that vanished when investigated. Animals avoided the area entirely, leaving patches of the forest unnaturally quiet, as if nature itself had rejected the ground tainted by human cruelty. The surviving children, though removed from the direct influence of the twins, carried the weight of trauma for the rest of their lives. Each faced profound challenges, physical, psychological, and emotional. Institutional care provided basic survival, but the sense of normal childhood was forever stolen. They were reminders to the world of the dangers of obsessive isolation and the cold rationalization of cruelty. Attempts to reintegrate them into society met with limited success. Many local families, once curious about the case, were unwilling to adopt or help rehabilitate the children, fearing the lingering influence of the twins' methods or the deep psychological scars the children carried. Crater Lake itself became a place of whispered story. The Oats property had been removed, but the tale of the twins persisted. Every generation of hunters, loggers, and travelers learned to heed warnings about the old forest. Even the most skeptical dismissed their fears reluctantly, influenced by unexplainable sounds in the night, scratching, muffled cries, the rhythmic rocking that seemed almost human in origin. Some theorized that the trauma of the children had somehow infused the location with a lingering psychic residue, a dark echo of past horrors. Others believed that the forest's twisted vegetation, with gnarled trees and strange growths, was proof that something unnatural had taken root. In nearby towns, the legend became cautionary folklore. Parents warned children to avoid curiosity that led them too far into the mountains, telling them the story of Phoebe and Wilbert Oats to illustrate how obsession could destroy not only those immediately involved, but entire community. Traveling merchants and lumberjacks passed down tales of disappearances and sounds they could never explain, leaving a permanent imprint on the collective consciousness of the region. By the mid-20th century, the story of the Oats twins was firmly entrenched in Oregon's folklore, a dark mirror of human obsession and cruelty. Historical examinations of the Oats case revealed the unnerving sophistication of the twins' planning. Unlike most criminals, Phoebe and Wilbert had carefully selected a location that offered both isolation and access to the outside world when needed. Their knowledge of human development, heredity, and psychology allowed them to treat their children as objects of study, observing the effects of deprivation, confinement, and environmental manipulation with a precision that was nearly scientific. Their obsession wasn't impulsive, it was systematic. They were aware of potential risks, learned from past intrusions, and adapted their methods to continue undisturbed. Homer Mixon and Benson, who dared to investigate, became unwilling participants in this calculated environment, eliminated in ways that ensured the twins' continued secrecy. In academic circles, the Oats case has occasionally been referenced as a warning about the dangers of pseudo-scientific obsession and the misuse of knowledge. Psychologists and criminologists examining the case have highlighted the twins' complete detachment from empathy, illustrating how an unyielding belief in rationality and control can rationalize unconscionable acts. The twins' justifications to study heredity, to understand human development, stand as chilling examples of how moral compasses can be warped by obsession and ideology. The land itself remains a testament to the even decades after the house burned. Locals described the area as uneasy, a place where shadows seemed to move differently, and the silence was palpable. Children dared each other to venture close, only to return shaken, reporting feelings of being watched or hearing inexplicable noise. Hunters took extended detours, and even modern-day explorers report a residual dread when traversing the former property. While the forest eventually reclaimed the land, the psychological impact of the twins' actions seemed to have imprinted itself on the environment. Researchers investigating the legend note that the Oats twins story exemplifies the terrifying potential of isolation, obsession, and unchecked authority within a family unit. Unlike natural disasters or external threats, the danger came from those who should have nurtured and protected. The isolation provided by the Oregon mountains created the perfect incubator for the twins' obsessive experimentation,
illustrating how geography and human ambition can intersect to produce prolonged unchecked horror. Modern media has occasionally revisited the tale, often framing it as a lost Oregon horror or dark family secret, but the truth remains more disturbing than fiction. The systematic nature of the twins' abuse, the clinical approach to their children, and the elimination of those who threatened exposure, combine to form a uniquely terrifying historical case. What makes the story haunting is not only the physical abuse endured by the children, but the psychological manipulation, the transformation of human beings into objects, and the twins' unwavering belief in the righteousness of their acts. Ultimately, the legend of the Oats twins forces reflection on human nature, morality, and vigilance. How many atrocities might occur unnoticed in isolated areas today? How many cases of neglect or abuse are rationalized as necessary or justified by personal ideology? The story encourages a cautious awareness, urging communities to recognize warning signs and intervene before obsession becomes tragedy. Crater Lake and the surrounding Oregon mountains, quiet and dense, remind us that some horrors don't vanish with time, they linger in memory, in folklore, and in the very land itself. Even now, more than a century later, the story of Phoebe and Wilbert Oats continues to echo. It serves as a warning that human cruelty, when combined with isolation, obsession, and rationalization, can create nightmares as terrifying as any imagined ghost or monster. The surviving children may have escaped the immediate grasp of the twins, but the psychological scars and the legacy of the Oats property endure, an eternal shadow in the quiet Oregon wilderness. The legend is not merely a tale of history, it is a study of the human capacity for darkness, and a reminder that vigilance, empathy, and awareness are our only safeguards against the horrors that can arise when those qualities are absent. Even decades after the Oats property was destroyed by fire, the legend of Phoebe and Wilbert Oats refused to fade. Crater Lake and its surrounding forests became synonymous with whispers of the past, a place where locals instinctively felt a chill whenever the mountains grew quiet. Hunters spoke of footsteps that weren't their own, muffled cries that seemed to emanate from nowhere, and shadows that darted between the trees with unnatural speed. Those who ventured too close to the original property site reported an oppressive heaviness in the air, a psychological weight that felt almost alive. The surviving children, though removed from the immediate grasp of the twins, never truly escaped their trauma. Even under professional care, their psychological scars proved enduring. The oldest girl, whose body had been severely deformed and weakened by years of confinement, lived her life in specialized institutions, relying on caretakers for every aspect of daily living. She never walked without assistance, never experienced the freedom of a normal childhood, and remained haunted by fragments of memories, screams, darkness, and the ever-present surveillance of her parents. The boy, who displayed severe cognitive impairments and repetitive behaviors, never surpassed the mental development of a small child. He could perform simple tasks and communicate basic ideas, but he remained incapable of independence. The youngest children, particularly the 7-year-old girl, and the boy who lost sight in one eye, fared the worst. The girl succumbed to her weakened body within 2 years, while the boy survived until adolescence, constantly battling phobias, panic attacks, and the haunting fear of confinement. Their lives were a living testament to the unrelenting consequences of prolonged abuse. The Crater Lake community, though initially horrified, grew wary of discussing the case publicly. The Oats twins had left an indelible mark on local memory, and even years later, whispers filled the air around campfires, schools, and town gatherings. The forests surrounding the property were avoided not merely because of superstition, but out of a deep-seated instinct that something was irreparably wrong in that space. Trees grew twisted and malformed, and hunters reported an unnatural stillness, as if the land itself mourned or feared the history it had witnessed. Historians and criminologists who later examined the case emphasized the deliberate and methodical nature of the twins' action. Unlike impulsive abusers, Phoebe and Wilbert had meticulously planned their experiments. From the selection of a remote property to years of observation and documentation, their methods reflected an almost scientific precision. They adapted strategies after each intrusion, eliminated threats systematically, and maintained absolute control over their environment. Homer Mixon and Dr. Benson were not random casualties. They were obstacles in a carefully constructed system, removed in ways that ensured the twins' work continued unchallenged. In academic discussions, the Oats case became a grim exemplar of the dangers of extreme isolation combined with ideological obsession. Psychologists cited the twins' lack of empathy and ability to rationalize cruelty as evidence of psychopathy, compounded by a pseudo-scientific delusion. The case remains a chilling study of how obsession, unchecked authority, and geographical isolation can allow human monstrosity to flourish under the guise of progress or scientific inquiry. The legacy of the Oats twins also sparked reflection on modern society. How many acts of cruelty go unnoticed in isolated locations? How often is ideology used to justify inhumane actions? While the property itself was destroyed, the psychological and cultural footprint remained. Communities became more vigilant, and the story served as a cautionary tale. Neglecting warning signs and allowing isolation to hide aberrant behavior can lead to tragedies that span generations. Even today, visitors to the former Oats property site speak of inexplicable phenomena, shadows moving through the dense foliage, distant sounds of weeping, and a pervasive sense of dread are frequently reported. Local lore suggests that the land has absorbed the trauma of the Oats family, that the echoes of horror linger in the very soil. Some believe that the forest itself has become a living monument to the atrocities committed, a silent guardian warning those who dare trespass. The story of Phoebe and Wilbert Oats ultimately reminds us that human cruelty does not require supernatural forces to terrify. It arises from obsession, detachment, and the rationalization of inhuman acts. The twins did not act out of madness in the chaotic sense. Every step was deliberate, every action calculated. They transformed their children into objects of study, observing, documenting and refining methods of confinement and control. Even in imprisonment, their belief in the righteousness of their actions remained unwavering, underscoring the chilling disconnection from empathy that had defined their lives. Waldo Oates, the patriarch who had attempted to intervene, never fully recovered. Committed to a state asylum after his discovery of the basement horrors, he spent the remainder of his life haunted by the sounds and memories that had tormented him. His decline is a somber footnote in the story, illustrating how even those with good intentions can be utterly powerless against calculated evil when geographical and psychological isolation combine. The tale of the Oats twins also endures as a warning about vigilance, moral responsibility, and the consequences of ignoring red flags in isolated or insular environments. The mountains of Oregon, quiet and foreboding, are a living testament to the dangers that arise when obsession goes unchecked, when morality is subordinated to ideology, and when human empathy is abandoned. In the Oregon forests, where the wind whispers through ancient trees and shadows stretch unnaturally across the moss-covered ground, the legend of the Oats twins persists. It serves as an eternal reminder that horror often emerges not from the unknown, but from the deliberate calculated actions of those who masquerade as ordinary human beings. It reminds us that human capacity for cruelty is limitless, that isolation can incubate monstrosity, and that sometimes the darkest stories are not found in myth or legend, but in the reality of human obsession, gone terribly wrong. The forests of Crater Lake may have reclaimed the land and the house may have burned, but the story of the Oats twins endures. Their legacy is a cautionary tale whispered among generations, a reminder that vigilance, awareness and moral courage are essential to prevent the repetition of unspeakable horrors. And so the mountains of Oregon remain silent yet watchful, carrying the weight of a story that refuses to be forgotten, a story of obsession, cruelty, and the enduring shadows of humanity's darkest impulses.
Decades after the arrest of Phoebe and Wilbert Oats, the legend of the Oats property remained alive in the collective memory of Oregon. While the house had been destroyed by fire in 1920, the stories persisted in hushed conversations among locals, passed down from generation to generation. The mountains surrounding Crater Lake, dense and foreboding, became more than just a landscape. They were a reminder that isolation could harbor unspeakable human cruelty. The surviving children removed from the Oats household struggled with life outside confinement. Psychological studies of their conditions later revealed profound trauma, cognitive delays, emotional detachment, and behavioral conditioning that resembled survival mechanisms from prolonged captivity. The oldest girl never walked without assistance and remained in institutional care her entire life. The boy with severe developmental delays learned a few words and basic tasks, but was never able to live independently. The youngest children fared even worse. The 7-year-old girl died 2 years after her rescue due to complications from prolonged neglect, and the youngest boy survived only until adolescence, plagued by panic attacks and debilitating phobias. Their lives were a stark testament to the enduring consequences of the twins' obsession. For historians, psychologists, and criminologists, the Oats case became a touchstone for understanding extreme human cruelty, the psychological effects of isolation, and the dangers of unchecked obsession. The twins' actions were methodical, premeditated, and executed with precision. Unlike impulsive criminals, they had planned their experiments for years, studied heredity, observed other families and institutions, and refined their methods with each intrusion. They manipulated their environment, eliminated threats like Homer Mixon and Dr. Benson, and viewed their children as study subjects rather than human beings. The Crater Lake community, still haunted by the events, developed a cautious respect for the surrounding forest. Hunters reported eerie phenomena, faint cries that could not be traced, shadows moving between the trees, and an oppressive stillness that defied natural explanation. Even decades later, locals avoided the area where the Oats house had stood, believing that the land itself had absorbed the trauma and horror of the twins' actions. The forests, twisted and overgrown, seemed to reflect the unnatural history of the property. In popular culture, the story of the Oats twins became a cautionary tale about the consequences of isolation, obsession, and the rationalization of cruelty. Folklore preserved the narrative, embellishing it over time while maintaining the core truths. Two siblings united in obsession and madness transformed their children into objects of study, and the land around them became a silent witness to horrors that defied comprehension. The legend inspired local writers, historians, and even true crime enthusiasts to examine the boundaries of human morality and the hidden dangers of unchecked ambition. The twins themselves never waver in their belief that their actions were justified. Phoebe died in prison in 1934 at age 50, still claiming that science would one day validate her methods. Wilbert survived until 1951, spending nearly 40 years in confinement, unrepentant and convinced that their work had been of profound importance. Their lack of remorse and unbroken belief in the righteousness of their actions remain one of the most chilling aspects of the case, illustrating a complete detachment from basic human empathy. Even Waldo Oates, who had attempted to intervene, never recovered from the psychological torment of discovering the basement horrors. Confined to a state asylum for the remainder of his life, he spent his days muttering about children who should never have existed and sounds that haunted him from the past. His decline underscores how proximity to calculated evil can leave permanent scars, even on those who act with good intentions. Modern investigations into the Oats property site, though limited, have yielded strange observations. Researchers and hikers report unnatural stillness, twisted tree growth, and occasional inexplicable sounds, interpreted by locals as echoes of past horrors. Some speculate that the land retains the psychological imprint of the twins' atrocities, a concept sometimes referred to as place memory, where trauma and intense emotion leave a lingering mark on the environment. Whether legend, psychological suggestion, or some unexplainable phenomenon, these reports keep the story alive, serving as a cautionary signal for those who venture too close. The story of the Oats twins forces reflection on broader societal issues: how isolation can enable abuse, how obsession can distort moral reasoning, and how vigilance is essential to prevent harm. It challenges the assumption that civilization automatically enforces morality, reminding us that horror often emerges not from supernatural forces, but from the rational, deliberate actions of humans. The twins' story is a stark example of how ordinary people, under certain conditions, can perpetrate extraordinary cruelty. In the end, the Oregon mountains, where the trees grow dense and the wind carries whispers of the past, stand as a silent witness to one of the darkest chapters in human history. The Oats twins' actions, though confined to a single property, ripple through time, reminding us that vigilance, awareness, and moral courage are necessary to prevent tragedy. The legend endures not merely as a story of horror, but as a reminder that evil can flourish in silence, and that the consequences of obsession are measured in lives irreparably harmed. The tale of Phoebe and Wilbert Oats continues to captivate historians, folklorists, and true crime enthusiasts. Their lives and crimes have been documented in numerous accounts, each retelling a grim reminder of humanity's capacity for cruelty. Hunters, hikers, and travelers in the Oregon forests remain cautious, aware that even in the quietest corners, darkness may linger. The mountains, forests, and the whispers of Crater Lake remind us that some secrets are buried, not by choice, but by the sheer magnitude of human fear and incomprehension. Ultimately, the story of the Oats twins is a warning across generations. Isolation, obsession, and rationalized cruelty can transform ordinary circumstances into chambers of horror. The surviving children's lives, the community's fear, and the ongoing echoes in the forests all testify to the lasting consequences of unchecked evil. And while the house itself is gone, the lesson remains: vigilance, empathy, and moral responsibility are the most potent defenses against the hidden monsters of the human heart. The legend of the Oats twins endures in Crater Lake, Oregon, a chilling reminder that the darkest horrors are not always found in myth, but in the calculated actions of humans, capable of rationalizing atrocities in the name of progress,
science, or obsession. The mountains hold their secrets, and those who listen carefully to the wind may still hear the faint cries and whispers of a tragedy that should never have been. Even after the trial and imprisonment of Phoebe and Wilbert Oats, the Crater Lake community could not shake the shadow cast by the twins. Stories of the horrors that had unfolded within the Oats property were whispered in taverns, homes, and schools, passed down from one generation to the next. Parents warned their children to avoid the mountains, and hunters who had once roamed freely now followed longer, cautious paths through the forest. The land itself seemed to bear the memory of what had occurred. Historians who later examined the Oats case were struck not just by the brutality of the twins' actions, but by the meticulous planning and premeditation. The twins had not acted impulsively. They had researched, observed, and created a system of containment and observation that mirrored scientific rigor, yet was completely devoid of ethical consideration. Their diaries, notebooks, and diagrams became critical case studies for criminologists and psychologists, exploring the effects of obsession, isolation, and rationalized cruelty. The surviving children, despite being removed from the Oats household, faced lifelong challenges. Decades of confinement, malnutrition, and psychological conditioning had left permanent scars. Efforts by child welfare specialists and psychologists helped them regain basic social skills and physical development where possible, but the damage was profound. Their struggles served as a grim reminder of the long-term impact of abuse and the failure of isolation to prevent harm. Local folklore elevated the Oats property into a symbol of hidden horror. Even after the house burned in 1920, rumors persisted that the land itself was cursed or haunted. Hunters reported strange, unexplainable phenomena, shadows moving between trees, faint crying carried by the wind, and the uneasy feeling of being watched. Some claimed that the forest near the property had grown twisted and sickly, reflecting the unnatural influence of the horrors once perpetrated there. Researchers exploring the area often noted a chilling stillness and a sense of foreboding that defied natural explanation. In Oregon's broader cultural consciousness, the Oats twins became archetypes of human monstrosity disguised as normalcy. Their story inspired books, articles, and lectures on true crime, psychology, and the ethics of scientific observation. Scholars debated the extent to which the twins' isolation, consanguinity, and obsessive study of heredity contributed to their action. The case highlighted the dangers of unchecked curiosity and the absence of moral accountability, illustrating that the darkest horrors are often the result of human choice, rather than supernatural forces. The Oats property also became a focus for early child welfare reform advocates. Their discoveries reinforced the necessity of monitoring isolated families and communities, the importance of legal oversight, and the role of social services in preventing abuse. The case underscored the difficulty of intervening in remote areas, where geographic isolation can allow dangerous behaviors to continue unnoticed for years. Crater Lake's tragedy became a cautionary tale for the establishment of stricter regulations surrounding child welfare and the monitoring of high-risk households. Even in prison, Phoebe and Wilbert maintained their unwavering belief in the justification of their action. Phoebe died in 1934, convinced that her methods were scientifically valid. Wilbert lived until 1951, never expressing remorse, and claiming that history would eventually recognize the importance of their work. Their unrepentant stance left a haunting impression on anyone who studied their case. The absence of empathy and moral recognition in the midst of methodical cruelty remained deeply unsettling. For contemporary audiences, the legend of the Oats twins continues to provoke fear and fascination. The mountains and forests near Crater Lake remain a site of eerie curiosity. Paranormal enthusiasts and historians occasionally visit the area, drawn by reports of strange noises, twisted trees, and an unnatural stillness. While some dismiss these reports as folklore, others suggest that the psychological imprint of the twins' actions may linger in the environment, a phenomenon sometimes described as residual haunting or place memory. The story of Phoebe and Wilbert Oats serves as both a warning and a study. It reminds us that isolation can conceal unimaginable acts, that obsession can warp moral judgment, and that humans are capable of rationalizing cruelty in ways that defy comprehension. The surviving children's suffering, the community's fear, and the ongoing fascination with the legend underscore the enduring lessons of this dark chapter in Oregon's history. Ultimately, the Oats twins' story is a reflection of human potential for both ingenuity and monstrosity. It illustrates that horrors are not always supernatural, but often emerge from ordinary people who, under certain conditions, commit extraordinary crime. The legacy of the Oats twins forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, that evil can flourish quietly, that vigilance is essential, and that the most isolated corners of our world may hide the deepest secrets of human behavior. Even as the forests regrow and decades pass, the whispers of Crater Lake continue to tell the tale. Hunters, hikers, and travelers speak of a lingering unease, a sense that the past refuses to stay buried. The legend of the Oats twins endures as an eternal warning that human cruelty, when combined with isolation and obsession, can create horrors that echo far beyond the confines of a single property. The mountains, ancient and silent, hold these secrets, a reminder that some of humanity's darkest chapters are not written in history books alone, but are etched into the very land itself.
Even decades after the Oats twins were imprisoned and the property destroyed, the story of Phoebe and Wilbert continued to haunt Crater Lake and the surrounding Oregon mountains. Locals who had grown up hearing whispered accounts of the horrors remained wary of the area. Hunters, hikers, and even park rangers would occasionally report inexplicable phenomena, fleeting shadows between the trees, strange rustling in otherwise still underbrush, and the faintest echoes of children crying in the wind. While skeptics dismissed these accounts as imagination or legend, the intensity of the fear surrounding the site suggested a lingering psychological effect that could not be easily explained. Researchers who studied the Oats case in the mid-20th century noted that the twins' meticulous records were a disturbing insight into human obsession and rationalization. The notebooks, diagrams, and observations revealed an almost scientific approach to depravity, demonstrating that cruelty can be systematic, premeditated, and coldly logical. For criminologists and psychologists, the Oats case became a foundational study in understanding how isolation, obsession, and ideological justification can combine to produce monstrous behavior. The concept of moral disengagement, the ability to rationalize harming others without remorse, was illustrated vividly in the twins' writings. Modern folklore surrounding the Oats property has elevated the site to a cautionary symbol. Storytellers emphasize not only the cruelty and neglect endured by the children, but also the unnatural, obsessive precision of the twins' actions. Tours of the Oregon wilderness occasionally include references to the Oats legend, often warning visitors that the mountains have a history of hidden horrors. While the exact location of the property has long since been reclaimed by the forest, tales of strange lights and eerie noises persist. Some locals believe that the energy of suffering experienced on the land may have left an indelible mark, a concept sometimes referred to as psychic imprint or residual haunting. The case also inspired deeper social reflection on the importance of community oversight, child welfare, and legal intervention. At the time of the twins' activities, the geographic isolation of Crater Lake allowed almost a decade of abuse to continue unnoticed. Today, the story serves as a stark reminder that remote communities are particularly vulnerable to hidden forms of cruelty, and that vigilance, reporting, and protective oversight are crucial to prevent such tragedy. Child protection policies, school reporting mechanisms, and social welfare interventions have evolved significantly since the early 20th century, and the Oats case remains a cautionary touchstone in training programs and historical analysis. Cultural works, books, documentaries, and podcasts have ensured that the legend of the Oats twins remains alive. While some accounts embellish aspects of the story for dramatic effect, the historical core, the twins' systematic cruelty, the abuse and malnutrition of their children, and the mysterious disappearances of outsiders like Homer Mixon and Dr. Benson, remains uncontested. Their case is often compared to other infamous historical examples of familial abuse, isolation-driven horrors, and obsessive experiments on unwilling human subjects. Interestingly, the Oats legend has also entered regional superstition. In small towns around Crater Lake, residents continue to warn that certain areas of the forest feel wrong or unsettling, a sensation attributed to the long-ago events on the property. Hunters report unusual stillness, a sensation of being watched, or sudden cold drafts in otherwise temperate conditions. These stories, whether factual or psychological, contribute to a living mythology that blends history, folklore, and human fascination with the dark and unknown. For descendants of those who lived near the Oats property, the legend serves as both a cautionary tale and a reminder of human resilience. Families affected by the twins' crimes, whether directly, as in the case of Waldo Oats, or indirectly, through community fear, learn to maintain vigilance, to value community ties, and to recognize the subtle signs of danger hidden behind the appearance of normalcy. The story of the Oats twins is a permanent part of Oregon's cultural memory, an enduring example of the extremes to which obsession and moral blindness can lead. Even today, historians and folklorists returning to the region note that the Oats case offers lessons far beyond the immediate horror. It challenges assumptions about human nature, morality, and the limits of empathy. It demonstrates how isolation, secrecy, and rationalized ideology can combine to perpetuate suffering on an unimaginable scale. And it reminds us that some of the darkest stories are not myth. They are grounded in human history, in human choices, and in the darkest corners of ordinary life. The mountains of Oregon, dense and ancient, have reclaimed the Oats property physically, but the story continues to echo through time, in the wind through the trees, in the stillness of the forest, and in the retelling of the legend. The memory of Phoebe and Wilbert Oats persists. The cautionary tale of the twins underscores a chilling truth. Human depravity is not bound by supernatural forces. It can arise quietly, meticulously, and methodically, right under the guise of normalcy and purpose. As the sun sets over the Oregon mountains, shadows stretch long over the land where the Oats property once stood. The story of Phoebe and Wilbert serves as an eternal reminder that evil can hide in plain sight, that obsession can override empathy, and that sometimes the most horrifying monsters are those born of human hand. The legend persists, haunting not only the forests of Oregon, but the imagination of all who hear it, a dark testament to what can happen when curiosity becomes cruelty, and love is replaced by calculation. By the mid-20th century, the legend of the Oats twins had transcended Crater Lake and entered broader Oregon folklore. While the immediate horrors of their actions were contained to the isolated mountains, the psychological impact on the region's residents was lasting. Families who had grown up hearing whispered tales of locked rooms, muffled cries, and vanished neighbors carried a collective unease that persisted across generations. The story became a touchstone in discussions of rural isolation, familial secrecy, and the dangers of unchecked obsession. Historians and criminologists who revisited the case in the 1950s and 1960s found that the surviving children, though long removed from the property, bore permanent marks of the twins' cruelty. Reports noted that even with specialized care, the psychological scars endured: extreme social anxiety, inability to form intimate bonds, and persistent phobias associated with confinement. Their physical deformities, in some cases exacerbated by years of malnutrition and neglect, made reintegration into society nearly impossible. Modern psychologists studying their cases describe them as living examples of how prolonged trauma, especially inflicted in formative years, can permanently alter cognitive, emotional, and physical development. The Oats property itself, destroyed by fire in 1920, remained a locus of fear. Local explorers, who attempted to locate remnants of the house, reported a sense of unnatural stillness in the forest. Some claimed to have seen charred ruins partially concealed by thick underbrush, while others reported encountering areas where the trees grew in twisted, unnatural patterns, as if the land itself had absorbed the malevolence that occurred there. Even decades later, hikers would occasionally hear sounds they could not explain: distant sobbing, footsteps in abandoned clearings, or the faint creak of doors that no longer existed. Folklorists began referring to the location as a psychologically haunted landscape, a site where human cruelty had left a lasting imprint on the collective imagination of the community. In addition to folklore, the Oats case also influenced legal and social policy. The case became a cornerstone in training programs for child welfare officers, social workers, and law enforcement officials. It highlighted the dangers of isolated communities, the importance of vigilance when dealing with unreported or unusual family situations, and the need for structured intervention when warning signs appear. The horrifying examples of Homer Mixon, Benson, and Waldo Oates reinforced the necessity of taking missing person reports seriously, even in remote areas. Throughout the 20th century, the Oats legend continued to inspire both academic and popular work. Documentaries explored the psychological profile of the twins, examining how isolation and obsessive belief systems could lead to systematic cruelty. Books analyzing the history of rural crime in Oregon frequently cited the Oats case as one of the most extreme examples of familial abuse combined with pseudo-scientific justification. Some true crime authors even speculated about the possible hidden locations of other victims, though no evidence ever emerged to suggest additional crimes beyond what was already documented. Modern investigations, using contemporary techniques, have attempted to uncover any remaining traces of the property and its horrific history. Archaeologists and forensic historians conducted surveys in the 1970s and 1980s, searching for artifacts, remnants of the basement rooms, and personal items belonging to the twins' children. While the forest had reclaimed much of the land, the teams occasionally uncovered small fragments, rusted buckets, corroded nails, and traces of foundation. These remnants served as tangible proof of a place that had become larger than the twins themselves, a symbol of the potential for human obsession to wreak lasting damage. Despite all efforts to document and understand the case, some aspects remain shrouded in mystery. The exact fate of Homer Mixon and Dr. Clarence Benson is still unknown.
Their bodies were never recovered. Some theorists have suggested the twins may have hidden them in locations that were later destroyed in the fire, or obscured by forest regrowth. Others propose that the meticulous planning documented in the twins' notes implies a deliberate effort to eliminate all evidence of their interference. Regardless of the specifics, the unresolved disappearances contribute to the eerie aura surrounding the legend. The Oats twins themselves have become archetypes in both criminal psychology and folklore. Phoebe and Wilbert serve as examples of how obsession, isolation, and a lack of moral constraint can intersect to create prolonged suffering for innocent. Scholars often reference their case when studying the effects of consanguinity, combined with ideological rationalization, as well as the dangerous potential of treating humans as subjects rather than individuals with rights and dignity. Their ability to operate undetected for nearly a decade demonstrates the potential consequences of geographic and social isolation, especially when coupled with meticulous planning and community silence. In contemporary times, the story of the Oats twins is shared not only as a historical account but also as a warning. Educational programs in psychology, criminology, and child welfare use the case to illustrate extreme consequences of neglect, obsession, and the misuse of pseudo-scientific reason. True crime podcasts and historical documentaries continue to revisit the legend, often emphasizing the eerie psychological aspects rather than solely the physical horror. Through these retellings, Phoebe and Wilbert's legacy persists, serving as a grim reminder that evil can be methodical, calculated, and terrifyingly rational. Even now, visitors to the Oregon mountains report feeling an inexplicable tension when passing through areas near the former Oats property. Hunters and hikers describe the air as heavier or charged with unease, while local residents warn against venturing too close after dusk. The story has become part of the cultural fabric of the region, a whispered legend that blends historical fact with folklore, cautioning anyone who would ignore warning signs of cruelty and obsession. Ultimately, the legacy of the Oats twins is both chilling and instructive. Their actions demonstrate that horror is not always the result of supernatural forces, but can arise from human choices, rationalization, and obsession. The isolated Oregon mountains provided the perfect setting for their deeds, and the silence of the surrounding community allowed their crimes to continue unchallenged. Their story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the capacity for human evil and the consequences of inaction, isolation, and unchecked obsession. The Oregon mountains still hold countless secrets beneath their ancient trees, but the story of the Oats twins serves as a permanent warning. Even though the physical traces of their property have vanished, the echoes of their crimes continue to influence how we understand human cruelty, isolation, and the dark corners of family obsession. The tale reminds us that vigilance, empathy, and accountability are essential, and that ignoring subtle signs of danger can allow horrors to flourish unnoticed. The legend endures, a shadowy chapter in Oregon's history, a reminder of the darkest potential within humanity, and a caution to anyone who might believe that such atrocities are impossible in the modern world. In the forests where whispers of the past still drift through the trees, the story of Phoebe and Wilbert Oats remains, haunting, instructive, and eternally unsettling.
In the decades following the trial and imprisonment of Phoebe and Wilbert Oats, the case has remained a focal point for scholars, psychologists, and folklorists alike. Its notoriety lies not merely in the grotesque nature of the twins' crimes, but in the systematic and cold-blooded way they rationalized their actions. Unlike impulsive acts of violence, the Oats twins meticulously planned, documented, and executed their abuse over a period of more than a decade. In studying the case, modern criminologists emphasize how isolation, familial secrecy, and ideological fanaticism can combine to create prolonged suffering that goes unnoticed for years. The surviving children's conditions highlight the long-term consequences of such abuse. Physical deformities, developmental delays, and psychological trauma persisted despite removal from the Oats property. Today, child welfare specialists reference these outcomes when advocating for early intervention and stricter oversight in cases of extreme isolation or familial control. The Oats case serves as a grim precedent demonstrating that harm inflicted in early childhood has effects that can ripple across a lifetime, and that sometimes the most insidious forms of abuse are those cloaked in the guise of scientific study or discipline. The Oats twins also left a cultural imprint. In Oregon and beyond, their story is cited in discussions of human cruelty, isolation, and the ethical boundaries of scientific curiosity. Folklore and local legend maintain the eerie aura of the Crater Lake region. Hunters, hikers, and residents of nearby towns continue to report feelings of unease or hearing strange sounds near the former property. These stories, while unverifiable, reinforce the symbolic weight of the Oats property as a place where morality and empathy were systematically abandoned. The case also informs modern criminal investigation practices. Law enforcement agencies studying the Oats twins stress the importance of community awareness, prompt investigation of disappearances, and skepticism toward overly convincing facades of normality. Homer Mixon and Dr. Clarence Benson's disappearances underscore the dangers faced by individuals who attempt to intervene alone without proper support or preparation. Today, multi-agency cooperation, technological surveillance, and psychological profiling are crucial tools in preventing similar cases from going undetected. Moreover, the Oats twins highlight a particularly disturbing intersection of consanguinity, obsession with heredity, and pseudo-scientific rationalization. Historians note that the twins' belief in the scientific nature of their observations allowed them to suppress natural empathy and ethical concerns. Their actions demonstrate how ideology can distort morality, permitting acts that would otherwise be unimaginable. The case serves as a reminder of the dangers inherent when scientific curiosity or personal belief overrides compassion and human decency. Despite the grim history, the story of the Oats twins has fostered a broader understanding of the human psyche, particularly regarding extreme behaviors in isolation. Psychologists, historians, and sociologists study the case not only to comprehend the past but to inform prevention strategy. Schools of thought on trauma, child development, and family dynamics use the Oats twins as a case study in how systemic abuse operates, how it can remain hidden, and the profound consequences it has on both direct victims and the surrounding community. Finally, the legend of the Oats property endures as a cautionary tale. It serves as a chilling reminder that horrors do not always reside in the supernatural, but often emerge from ordinary individuals who convince themselves that cruelty is justified. The forests of Oregon, with their dense trees and hidden valleys, provided the perfect setting for the twins' actions, illustrating how geographic isolation can amplify the consequences of unchecked obsession. Even with the physical property destroyed, the psychological and cultural scars remain, embedded in the collective memory of the region. The story compels us to ask difficult questions. How many other tragedies remain hidden behind closed doors? How often do isolation, secrecy, and rationalization allow cruelty to persist unnoticed? And perhaps most importantly, how can communities, authorities, and individuals remain vigilant in identifying and addressing early warning signs? These questions, left unanswered in many cases, are illuminated starkly by the Oats twins' legacy. In the end, the Oats twins' story is a testament to both the darkest potential of human nature and the resilience of those who survive. While Phoebe and Wilbert conducted their experiments with ruthless calculation, the surviving children, despite lifelong trauma, bear witness to the human capacity for survival in the face of unimaginable adversity. The legend continues to captivate historians, folklorists, and true crime enthusiasts, a haunting echo of an era when isolation and obsession collided to produce one of Oregon's most infamous chapters. Through every retelling, whether in academic study, folklore, or modern media, the caution remains clear. Evil often hides behind the ordinary, and vigilance, empathy, and moral clarity are the first lines of defense against it. The mountains may have reclaimed the Oats property, but the story of Phoebe and Wilbert Oats endures, a warning to all who might think cruelty can flourish unnoticed. The case of Phoebe and Wilbert Oats remains one of the most disturbing in Oregon's history, not only for the scale of their crimes but for the sheer deliberateness with which they executed them. Over a decade of isolation, secrecy, and systematic abuse transformed the Oats property into a chamber of horrors, where children were treated as objects of study rather than human beings. Yet the legacy of the twins extends far beyond the walls of that now destroyed house. In the aftermath, communities around Crater Lake struggled to process the reality of what had occurred. Families, who had once trusted neighbors, friends, and local authorities, began to question the very foundations of safety and morality. The Oats case highlighted the insidious nature of isolation. When geography, secrecy, and social detachment converge, even ordinary communities can unknowingly harbor unimaginable cruelty. In this sense, the legend of the twins is not merely a tale of horror, it is a social warning. Psychologists and criminal researchers have since used the Oats twins as a textbook example of several phenomena: the moral disengagement that allows individuals to justify cruelty, the effects of extreme familial isolation, and the psychological consequences of consanguinity obsession. Their case also underscores the importance of vigilance by communities and authorities. Multiple disappearances occurred before action was taken, and the tragedies of Homer Mixon and Dr. Clarence Benson illustrate the peril of acting alone against well-prepared perpetrators. The surviving children, though removed from the property, carried lifelong scars, both visible and invisible. Physical deformities,
developmental delays, and profound psychological trauma served as constant reminders of the horrors they endured. Their experiences inform modern child welfare practices, highlighting the necessity of early intervention, careful monitoring, and comprehensive care for survivors of extreme abuse. Even decades later, specialists reflect on how the Oats twins' calculated cruelty continues to shape understandings of trauma, neglect, and recovery. Culturally, the Oats legend has persisted in the folklore of Oregon. Hunters, hikers, and locals recount eerie feelings when approaching the former property, claiming to hear faint echoes of cries or moans carried by the wind. Whether these are memories imprinted in the collective consciousness or lingering psychological traces, they serve as symbolic reminders of the cruelty that occurred. The story of the Oats twins has also permeated literature, podcasts, and true crime media, where it is frequently cited as an example of how obsession and isolation can override basic human decency. The narrative of the twins challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about human potential for cruelty. Phoebe and Wilbert never acted impulsively. Every step of their actions was premeditated, documented, and rationalized as scientific inquiry. This cold deliberation distinguishes them from many other criminal cases, reinforcing the terrifying idea that evil can exist, not only in bursts of passion, but in the meticulous planning of ordinary-appearing people. Ultimately, the Oats twins' story endures as a multifaceted warning. It speaks to the dangers of isolation, the necessity of moral oversight, and the vigilance required to protect the vulnerable. It reminds us that horrific acts can occur behind closed doors, even within seemingly ordinary families, and it challenges society to consider how to detect and intervene before curiosity, obsession, or ideology eclipses empathy and human decency. Though the Oats property is gone, destroyed by fire in 1920, the lessons remain. The case teaches vigilance, the importance of community awareness, and the tragic costs of inaction. It also emphasizes the need to safeguard children, ensure oversight in isolated environments, and confront the unsettling reality that some of the darkest acts are human-made, not supernatural. The mountains of Oregon, still dense and ancient, bear the silent memory of the Oats property. The echoes of suffering, the calculated cruelty, and the lost innocence linger in the local consciousness, a haunting testament to the extremes of human obsession. The legend of Phoebe and Wilbert Oats is not simply a story of horror, it is an enduring moral lesson. It forces reflection on empathy, vigilance, and the responsibility to intervene when something is amiss. In the end, the story compels a chilling question. How many other isolated places conceal horrors yet undiscovered? How often does society allow darkness to fester behind closed doors, rationalized as discipline, science, or secrecy? The case of the Oats twins reminds us that monsters are not always mythical. They often walk among us, hiding in plain sight, and the most horrifying atrocities are those committed under the guise of normalcy. Even as decades pass, the legend persists. The mountains remain, silent witnesses to a story that challenges our assumptions about human nature, morality, and the fragile line between obsession and atrocity. For those who listen to the wind through Oregon's ancient trees, the whispers of the past are a haunting reminder. Vigilance, empathy, and moral courage are essential, for the depths of human cruelty are boundless, and sometimes the darkest chapters unfold in the quietest corners of the world.